Tansi and welcome back. Miigwech to all new and returning listeners for tuning in to episode 2. In early spring of this year, I went to a round dance in the city. The round dance was hosted by my local college. I was asked by the Indigenous Student Support Manager if I would volunteer setting up and taking down. I agreed. When I got to the round dance, there wasn't much to do. Everything was already half set up, so all I had to do was wait until vendors and dancers started arriving. I was waiting alongside some of my classmates. When vendors did show up, I went from table to table, stating my name, introducing myself, and asking questions about the items that they were selling at their tables. One vendor I approached, she was selling sweaters and travel mugs, a few t-shirts, and some bags. They had steam-pressed decals on them. And beside this vendor's table, I met a woman. And I got to introducing myself, having a conversation of small talk, saying hi, hello, I'm here volunteering. I'm a student with the college that's hosting the round dance. And I was so comfortable talking to her, that's when I started discussing with her how I have an idea for a business. And my idea was a podcast. And I told her I wanted to start a podcast for Indigenous professionals because not many Indigenous professionals, there's a lack of Indigenous professionals that are within the mainstream media. For example, I grew up in the 2000s, so I know what a phone book is. And in the yellow pages of a phone book, I noticed there's not that many listings of Indigenous professionals and Indigenous businesses. And so, remembering that time from my childhood, I thought to myself, well, hey, there's an idea. I can start a podcast, an Indigenous podcast, and I can invite Indigenous scientists, Indigenous entrepreneurs, Indigenous business owners, Indigenous lawyers, Indigenous healthcare providers. I can invite them and I can showcase their stories. I can share their stories with audiences. Their stories full of experiences, full of challenges, full of heartwarming moments. And as I was talking with this woman that I met near the table with the steam pressed vinyls on these sweatshirts and these bags and these shirts, she said, well, why not get started today? In a way, she was telling me, why wait anymore? Why not start today? What are you waiting for? In not so many words, but that's what she was telling me. And I went, yeah, yes, I will start the podcast. I was so excited for her giving me that pep talk, for peer pressuring me in a positive way, for chasing after my dreams, after my goals, after my vision. And so, many months later, here I am. First podcast was aired on August 5th, and I'm filming the second episode. I hope this won't be boring for listeners who are tuning into episode 2, hearing me talk about how I started the podcast, where the idea came from, and where I see myself in the future in terms of the vision and the plans and the goals that I have for the podcast. Where do I envision myself and the podcast in the future? Well, I hope that within the next 2 to 5 years, I will still have this podcast. I will still be running this podcast because it is a goal of mine. It's a dream of mine to, and it's also out of curiosity why I started the podcast, because I'm curious to find Indigenous lawyers, Indigenous scientists, Indigenous astronauts, Indigenous surgeons. I'm a curious person by nature. So that's one of the reasons I started the podcast, is because I'm curious by nature, and also because I knew I wanted to do something meaningful. I wanted to impact many people in a positive and inspiring way. And so here I am, uh, in August 2025, and the podcast is here. I apologize if this episode takes me a while, and also for bouncing from one topic to the next. I'm just so excited to be sharing with listeners, new and returning listeners, the vision that I have for the podcast and the idea of starting a business from nothing, with no experience, with very little capital to invest in a business. And I hope you enjoy this episode. Moving on to the next question. What is one short-term goal I have for the podcast? Well, I have two short-term goals. One of them is to grow the number of listeners tuning into the episode. And the second short-term goal is that I will inspire those who are listening. I will inspire them with the stories that are shared from each guest. Stories of experiences, stories of challenges, and stories of awe-inspiring moments and milestones. What is one long-term goal I have for the podcast? To grow a platform of Indigenous professionals and storytellers. And through sharing their stories and their experiences and their knowledge, I hope that will inspire both younger and older generations for years to come. And for my last question, what is the vision that I have? What is the future I see for the podcast? I see the future where youth and elders are inspired from the stories that are shared, and that the podcast will be a platform that highlights Indigenous professionals and introduces them to mainstream media. I also hope to interview at least one Indigenous astronaut. I think that would be so cool. I would love to know how it feels training with NASA, and if they've ever gone to space, and also how it feels being in space. But that's it for tonight. I hope that there was some enjoyment from this podcast, and I hope that both new and returning listeners will want to come back and tune in to episode 3. Miigwech, thank you, and I hope to see you again in episode 3. In episode 3, I will be interviewing upcoming Canadian artist Love. That's LOV, all capital letters. And I hope to see all of you in episode 3.